Good morning. Thank you to the survivors for being here. Today we're going to provide a tangible proof of out-of-home powers to drive not just advertising success, but also business success, best practices in out-of-home, and how it effectively integrates with other media. We recognize that today's marketers are under more pressure than ever before to justify their media investments and prove immediate payback to the business. Certainly this is one of the reasons that is fueling the short-termism we currently see in advertising, which in turn drives even more media investments into digital channels with its promise of quick and easy performance measurement. Although as the wider marketing world is waking up to, if something is quick and easy, it possibly isn't providing the whole story. With that in mind, we wanted to understand out-of-home's role in driving hard business outcomes and how it works in a changing and challenging media landscape that is becoming increasingly dominated by digital. A common thing we all often hear from clients and agency planners is that while they love out-of-home, they found it historically challenging to quantify its effectiveness, meaning that without proven accountability, a planner's love for out-of-home can be easily overruled by a CFO spreadsheet. So our aim today, humbly, is to challenge current thinking and to impart some new knowledge while trying to quantify effectiveness in out-of-home, and doing so help to justify investments in a way that econometrics can't. We started with three key questions. How does out-of-home work? I know it sounds obvious, especially to this audience, but this simple question was about going deeper than individual campaign research, was more about to understand fundamentally the core strengths of out-of-home. Secondly, how effective are campaigns that use out-of-home versus those that don't? It was important to try and quantify these in hard business outcomes, not just claimed attitudes or intermediate and softer measures. Third, how does out-of-home amplify other media? Does it work equally well with all the channels, and does in the same way? To try and answer to these ambitious questions, we obviously needed an incredibly robust data source. The IPA, the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, is recognized as the world's most influential professional body for practitioners in advertising, marketing, communications. It's based in UK for over 100 years, and its programs can be found in more than 60 cities worldwide. The IPA have been running the IPA Effectiveness Awards for over 35 years, and it's the gold standard for advertising, for effectiveness in advertising, sorry. The data bank contains something like 2,000 case studies from around the world, each containing a wealth of market data, campaign research, sales figures, and profit analysis. Very important, this extensive data is in a comparable format that examines the nature and circumstances of the brand, the objective and the strategy of the campaign, the media mix used, the duration and the budget of the campaign, and its effect in terms of brand metrics, long-term business metrics, and short-term sales activation. So by focusing both on brand performance and hard business outcomes, this data bank provided a unique body of evidence to look for our answers. With such a vast array of data and the complexity of analyzing it, we hired Peter Field as our independent analyst. For anyone not familiar with Peter, he's one of the world's leading marketing effectiveness gurus, and having written a number of seminal texts on the subject, and he's also a regular speaker at marketing conferences around the world. And there's also no one more experienced than Peter when it comes to mining the IPA data bank. So it was an obvious choice, and we feel very privileged to have him working on this project. Right.
So as Fabio mentioned, with thousands of studies, some of which dated back 30 years or more, what was our approach to making sense of the data in order that we could begin to understand and interrogate it? Well, firstly, and owing to the differences in media consumption over the last 30 years, in particular the advent and growth of both online and social, we focused only on those campaigns from 2004 to 2016. Secondly, and owing to the fact that most most campaigns feature out of home in some shape or form or context, we have focused only on those campaigns where out of home represented a significant percentage of the overall media investment. For that reason, campaigns where 15% or more of the total budget was invested in out of home became our power users. And 15% wasn't selected as an arbitrary number or a number at random, but a figure roughly double that of standard investment into out of home. These group of 62 power users were then compared to 109 instances where brands or campaigns featured no out of home at all. And by focusing on these extremes, we were able to ignore all of the mush or all of the noise, as Peter called it, to have a really clear and demonstrable comparison between the effects of using out of home and not using out of home across a range of hard business and brand outcomes. But before we begin, I think with any study of this type, it's right just to highlight some of the limitations or constraints. And over the years, Peter and his colleagues have identified a number of key campaign characteristics which indicate or act as a barometer for a campaign's likely success. And the most important of these relates to extra share of voice, which has actually been proven to be more effective or a better indicator of effectiveness than market share. The fact that our power users report a lower extra share of voice means that they're actually at a disadvantage when compared to the control studies. The second disadvantage, which became apparent quickly, was that our power users of out of home were power users precisely because they're directing investment from one channel into another, and it just so turned out that they were often using out of home as a substitute for TV. The final disadvantage for our power users is the fact that they were made up of a greater number of short-term cases. By comparison, the sole advantage for our power users was the fact that they were typically made up of more service sector brands. However, because the service sector makes up approximately 80% of GDP, we don't believe that this unduly disadvantages or skews the results. So now the methodology's out of the way, it's on to the results. And I think the first finding of note really relates to the way in which the most effective brands are using out of home. After all, who better to learn from than those brands that have not only supplied the IPA with the hard business outcomes of their campaigns, but they've been recognized and rewarded for their achievements in this space. So the brand building qualities of out of home, I think, have long been recognized and long been espoused by studies such as The Long and Short of It or Byron Sharp's How Brands Grow. With that in mind, I think we fully expected instances of brand building to dominate the data bank. So it came as, I think, a surprise for us to learn that while 48% of brands were indeed using out of home for brand building, over half of people within the data bank were using it as a sales activation channel in one way, shape, or form. And I think this was a particularly unexpected result, given what we thought we knew about the media and maybe the popular opinion that while it's a great medium at influencing maybe those softer mid to long term campaign objectives, such as awareness, perception, and consideration, it might not always influence sales in the short term, across which econometric models tend to be built. So if over half of all brands within the data bank were using out of home as a sales activation channel, what else could we learn from this data set in terms of the way out of home works and in terms of its role within the wider communications mix? So in spite of our surprise at the frequency with which brands were using out-of-home, it was reassuring to learn that everything that we thought we knew about the media wasn't completely wrong, and actually it's still doing a phenomenal job at building brands' stature and fame, with fame and esteem increasing by 50% and 62% respectively. Now, it might seem as if fame and esteem are quite similar metrics, but they're actually working in quite different and nuanced ways. So the role of fame in out-of-home first works by increasing the noticeability of your brand and the prominence with which it features in conversation. And then the role of esteem comes to the fore, working to increase the levels of service and quality associated with your brand. And I think it was great to see that these brand effects didn't exist in isolation and that they were actually working to positively influence those stronger, longer-term business results too. So much so that we see strong increases across 3 metrics, the first of which is customer acquisition. So customers and customer acquisition are kind of the lifeblood of any organization. Without customers, you can't make any money. Without acquiring customers, you can't continue to grow or prosper your brand. In fact, without customers, you would cease to have a brand or business at all. So I think the fact that we see an increase for power users in customer acquisition of 10% is really promising as we begin to challenge this established narrative that out-of-home may not always shift the needle on those harder business metrics. But the fact that we also see increases for both profitability and market share, I think really goes a long way to validating the fact that those growth in new customers haven't come through a range of short-sighted tactics, as both profitability and market share are often considered more robust and more secure measures of long-term business health. So with regards to profitability, return on marketing investment is a familiar output associated with econometric models. But it's interesting that the IPA would advise that actually you shouldn't use return on marketing investment as a means to set media budgets. And they advise this because it's actually a measure of efficiency and it's not indicative of the net profit earned, which is a far greater measure of campaign effectiveness. So third and finally is market share, which is often upheld as the ultimate KPI for marketeers. And it's billed as that because it allows you to pause and reflect, to understand the performance of your brand or business against your competitor set, understand changes in consumer behavior, and identify whether your market might be in growth or decline. As in a particularly lucrative or fast-growing market, it may be that not only are yourselves and your competitors profitable, but left unchecked, you might ignore the fact that your market share is in decline, which left unaddressed could lead to long-term or terminal decline. So I think the fact that power users of out-of-home see such a marked and significant increase across each one of these key performance indicators, I think really speaks of the role out-of-home can play in driving long-term business success. And I think great as it is to challenge some of those conceptions or misconceptions about out-of-home, it was equally surprising for us to learn that power users of out-of-home also saw an increase of 22% in terms of the short-term sales activation effects. And it wasn't that we were surprised to learn that out-of-home can influence sales, but rather that I think we've always thought it to do so at the slower and more sustainable rate associated with brand building. And in light of the previous slide, I think the findings here might seem somewhat obvious, and in some ways they are. But we think there's a really important and clear message within them, namely that if the objective of your campaign is to increase short-term sales, then you're halving your chances of success by running a brand building message over a sales activation focused message. And it stands to reason that when evaluating performance, the same level of scrutiny, therefore, should be applied to the media strategy, the media placements, and the messaging used, as failure to do so is in many ways setting up the media to fail or even underperform, regardless of which channel it's across. As while a brand building campaign will increase sales by up to 30%, and the inclusion of sales activation boosts this further, It's the extent to which those activation-only campaigns outperform campaigns featuring both, which I think really challenged what we thought we knew about best practice and the idea of 60-40. And I think really speaks of the need for clarity when determining what the best role for media is. As if your short-term aim is to grow sales and you're going to be evaluating your media's performance accordingly, you really need to make sure that the messaging and those media placements are sales activation focused. And in spite of the previous couple of slides, I think sales activation is often portrayed, or has been portrayed, as the poorer relation in the brand building versus sales activation dynamic. And I think it's fascinating to see here that when we analyze results with and without sales activation, that it appears to be contributing more than the sum of its parts. So much so that those campaigns which feature both brand and sales activation deliver double the number of long-term brand and business results. And given how challenging it is for brands to positively influence or change consumers' attitudes and behaviors over the long term, the fact that a brand building only campaign firstly increases the number of effects on average by 1 is a phenomenal performance. But when we add in sales activation to that mix, it really appears to be turbocharging performance, and we think really speaks of the need for best practice if you're to achieve optimal performance from your out-of-home budgets.
Thank you, Ross. As we stated at the start, we also want you to understand how out-of-home worked in conjunction with other, with other media. Out-of-home provides a boost to the business effect delivered by the traditional channels of press, radio, and TV. A good uplift of 11% to press, 12% to radio, and an impressive 21% to television. But out-of-home's ability to amplify is actually strongest on digital channels. The data bank indicates that it outstandingly amplify the business effects of any online advertising by 31%, social by 56%, and search by a whopping 80%. Of course, search benefits from fame, so unsurprisingly, when brands are talking about there is a spike in search activity, and so it stands to reason then that based on out-of-home's ability to generate fame, it can significantly boost the effectiveness of search. In our quest in order to understand how out-of-home works, two themes started to emerge. On one side, we have brands that were using TV and out-of-home as the major part of their media mix. On the other side, we found brands that were more focusing on online and out-of-home as the major part of their media mix, who were often using out-of-home as a substitute to television. These two different media tactics gave us the opportunity to understand how out-of-home works with different media channels. If we look at Peter's finding about how out-of-home works with television, we can see that brands who are out-of-home power users actually are enhancing the performance of their TV activity, amplifying a number of brand effects with significant boost to fame and esteem in particular. If you want your brand to be famous, then it's clear that out-of-home works best with TV. But now, have a look on how out-of-home works with social. Out-of-home's core strengths can still be seen, seriously boosting the esteem of paid social. But what is interesting here, what is really interesting here, is out-of-home's role in enhancing brand trust. We believe that out-of-home public nature and stature appears to drive credibility and trust in a way that social can't achieve in its own right. So having analyzed what was happening to brand effects, we wanted to see how this translated into business effect. As we've seen, the power of brand fame to influence long-term business outcome is significant. So the fact that out-of-home and TV combine best to deliver fame, it came as no surprise to see that out-of-home power users turbocharged the effectiveness of TV across key business growth areas, including customer acquisition, profit, and market share. Now, like with TV, social also benefits from out-of-home power use by boosting market share with an incredibly higher uplift compared to television. Online channels, in fact, appears to benefit considerably when out-of-home is used alongside them. Search and social tend to be very short-term focused, so if you add a channel with long-term effects, you can see a significant boost. But what is really interesting here, again, is that out-of-home works very differently with social than it does with TV. Other than market share, out-of-home power users amplify the effects of social media in customer loyalty and price sensitivity. We believe this is down to the purpose of how online is mainly used, highly targeted, mostly at existing customers, and very focused on short term. In contrast with TV, which is mass reach, talking to all the category of buyers, and more brand focused. All this combined is really interesting as it points to the fact that out-of-home is a highly versatile channel, a very highly versatile channel, almost uniquely so. One that can do a brand job as well as a sales activation, but can also work to boost other media, yet in a very different ways. Sorry. Conclusion. If we remind ourselves the three key questions: how does out-of-home work? How effective is out-of-home? And how does out-of-home amplify other media? We believe we have now three very clear answers. First, out-of-home works by adding stature and fame to campaigns. It gets your brand talked about and ultimately enhances the perception of brand quality. Second, out-of-home power users are definitely more effective at delivering business outcomes, including those key growth metrics of customer acquisition, profit, and market share. Third, out-of-home boosts the out-of-home power users in particular, boosts the business effects of all other media, especially online and search and social in particular. Thank you for your time and for your attention. A sort of Starsky Hutch of the out-of-home here.